Nobody wakes up on a Tuesday morning in 1975 thinking, this is the year everything starts to shift. You get up, you make coffee, you go to work. You come home. You watch whatever's on one of the 3 channels, and you go to bed. It's just a year. It feels exactly like the year before it. But 1975 is one of those strange, quiet hinge years in American history. The kind that doesn't show up in a single dramatic headline the way, say, 1963 or 2001 does. Nothing on the news that year screamed, "Everything is different now." And yet, looking back, this is genuinely one of the years where the ground under the country's feet started moving. Slowly, almost invisibly, in a direction nobody at the time could have fully mapped out. I want to spend today inside that year, because I think it's a genuinely good example of how history actually works most of the time. Not with a bang. With 1,000 small, unremarkable Tuesdays that add up to something enormous only when you look back at all of them together. Let's set the stage, because to understand why 1975 feels the way it does, you have to understand what had just happened right before it. The Vietnam War had just ended, officially, in April, with the fall of Saigon, ending America's involvement in a conflict that had shaped an entire generation's politics, protests, and basic trust in its own government. The images that spring, helicopters lifting off the roof of the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, crowds of people desperate to get on the last flights out, played on all 3 networks and became some of the defining pictures of the entire decade. Richard Nixon had resigned the presidency less than a year earlier, in August of 1974, the first and only time that's ever happened in this country's history, after Watergate had spent 2 straight years dragging the country through a genuine constitutional crisis on live television. Gerald Ford, an unelected president who had never run on a national ticket, was sitting in the White House trying to project a sense of stability the country badly needed and didn't entirely believe. And that September alone, Ford survived 2 separate assassination attempts within just 17 days of each other, a detail that tends to get lost in the broader story of this year, but says something real about just how unsettled the whole period actually felt. So 1975 opens with a country that has just watched its president resign in disgrace, survived 2 attempts on the life of the man who replaced him, and just lost a war it had been fighting for over a decade. That's not a small backdrop. A huge number of Americans in 1975 had a level of distrust in their own institutions, the presidency, the military, the news itself, that simply hadn't existed for most people a decade earlier. And here's the thing I find genuinely interesting. None of that distrust announced itself as a permanent new feature of American life. It felt, to most people living through it, like a rough patch the country would eventually get past, the way it always had before. If this kind of honest, unpolished walk through American history is something you enjoy, go ahead and hit subscribe to Back Home in America, because we do this every single week. Now let's talk about what daily life actually looked like, because underneath all that political weight, 1975 still looked, on the surface, remarkably like the previous 15 or 20 years. 3 television networks still dominated everything. Cable television existed only in a small fraction of American homes, mostly in areas with poor over-the-air reception, and it carried almost nothing beyond rebroadcast local channels. The home video recorder essentially didn't exist yet for ordinary families. The first Betamax wouldn't hit the market until the following year, which meant if you missed a show, you simply missed it. And if you wanted to watch a movie, you went to a theater. There was no personal computer in any normal household. The very first hobbyist kits, the Altair 8800, had just been announced that January. A machine almost nobody outside a small community of electronics enthusiasts had even heard of, let alone imagined owning. Music still came overwhelmingly from vinyl records and the radio. The 8-track tape was still a common way to play music in a car, a format that within just a few years would be almost completely replaced by the cassette. Families still gathered around one television in the living room for the evening, because there usually was only one television in the house to gather around. In the texture of an ordinary evening, 1975 looked a great deal more like 1965 than it looked like what was coming in the following decade. Here's where it gets interesting. Because underneath that familiar surface, a few specific things were quietly getting built that would define the next 20 years, and almost nobody paying attention to their evening news broadcast had any idea. That January, the Altair 8800 was announced in Popular Electronics magazine, a build-it-yourself computer kit aimed at hobbyists, selling for under $400. It's genuinely primitive by any modern standard. No keyboard, no screen. You programmed it by flipping switches on the front panel. But a small number of young people saw that magazine cover and got obsessed. Among them, two guys in their 20s named Bill Gates and Paul Allen, who wrote software for the Altair that same year and founded a small company to sell it, a company they called Microsoft. Nobody in America in 1975 had any reason to know that name. It would be years before it meant anything to anyone outside a very small circle. That same year, Sony was preparing to launch Betamax in the U.S. market, the first real home video recorder aimed at ordinary consumers, which would arrive in stores in 1976. And economically, the country was living through something called stagflation. High inflation combined with high unemployment at the same time, a combination that mainstream economics of the era had genuinely struggled to explain, since the reigning theories said you weren't supposed to get both at once. That economic anxiety, quiet and grinding rather than dramatic, was reshaping how American families thought about spending, saving, and what kind of future they could actually count on, in ways that wouldn't fully show up in the culture for years. We're getting into the part of this story I find genuinely fascinating, and if any of this is landing for you, a like on this video really does help it reach more people who'd enjoy this kind of look back. I want to talk about something a little different now, the mood of the country, because I think it's just as important as the specific inventions and events. Historians and journalists writing about the mid-1970s often describe a genuine, widespread sense of exhaustion in American culture, sometimes called a national hangover, coming after more than a decade of assassinations, war, protest, and now a presidential resignation. A huge number of Americans in 1975 simply wanted things to feel normal again. Wanted a sense of stability that the previous 10 or 15 years hadn't offered much of. And in a strange way, that exhaustion itself shaped what came next, because it created a genuine hunger for exactly the kind of comfort, escapism, and nostalgia that would define a lot of American entertainment and culture through the back half of the decade. You can actually see this starting to show up in 1975 itself. Television that year leaned hard into nostalgic, comforting programming. Shows set in earlier, simpler-feeling decades were genuinely popular, offering audiences a kind of imagined return to a version of America that felt less complicated than the one they were actually living in. That instinct, reach backward for comfort when the present feels uncertain, is one this channel understands pretty well, since it's more or less the same instinct behind every video we make here. It's worth remembering that even the people living through 1975 were doing a version of exactly what we're doing right now, looking back at an earlier America for a sense of steadiness the present didn't quite offer. Let's talk about small towns and everyday communities specifically, because we've spent a lot of time on this channel walking through what small-town America looked like at different points, and 1975 sits at a genuinely interesting spot in that story. By 1975, a lot of the forces we've covered in other videos, the interstate highway system pulling traffic away from small-town main streets, school consolidation, removing the anchor institution from thousands of communities, farm consolidation, reducing the number of families the land actually needed, had already been working for a decade or more. A town that had been thriving in 1960 might, by 1975, be showing real, visible signs of strain. A few empty storefronts, a school that had already been merged into a larger district, a population that had noticeably aged as young families moved elsewhere. But it hadn't yet hit whatever we'd call rock bottom. The change was gradual enough, year to year, that someone living in that town the whole time might not have fully registered how much had shifted, the way you don't notice a person aging if you see them every single day. That's really the theme running through this entire year, I think. 1975 wasn't a dramatic before and after moment for most of the things we've talked about today. It was one more quiet turn of a wheel that had already been turning for years, and would keep turning for years afterward, largely invisible to the people standing closest to it. I want to be honest about something here, because I don't want to overstate how much any single year actually determines. It would be too tidy to say 1975 alone caused the following decades to unfold the way they did. The personal computer would have arrived eventually, with or without the Altair 8800. Cable and home video were coming, regardless of exactly which year Sony picked to launch Betamax. The country's political trust would have been shaped by Watergate and Vietnam, whether or not 1975 specifically was the year it settled into a new, lower baseline. What makes 1975 worth a whole video isn't that it was uniquely decisive. It's that it's a genuinely clear example of something true about almost every year in history. The biggest changes rarely arrive as a single dramatic event. They arrive as a hobbyist magazine article nobody outside a small circle reads, a product launch in a market nobody's watching yet, a mood of exhaustion that quietly reshapes what kind of television people want to watch that fall. Here's what I keep thinking about with this one. If you'd stopped someone on the street in December of 1975 and told them that a computer kit sold to hobbyists that January would, within 25 years, put a machine on almost every desk in the country, or that stagflation would help reshape American economic policy for a generation, or that the specific brand of nostalgic comfort television people were watching that fall was a preview of an entertainment instinct that would only get stronger, most of them would have looked at you like you were describing a different planet. They were just living their year, getting through a rough economy, watching the same 3 channels, trying to feel normal again after a decade that hadn't given them much chance to. That's the thing about the years that actually change everything. Almost nobody clocks them as they're happening. They just look like a Tuesday, and then a Wednesday, and then, 20 years later, an entire different world. If you remember 1975, or if your parents ever talked about what that particular year felt like, I would genuinely love to hear it in the comments. What the mood actually was, what you were watching, what people around you were worried about. These small, specific memories are exactly what make history feel real instead of abstract, and I read every one shared here. If you want more of this kind of honest look at the quiet years that turned out to matter more than anyone realized at the time, subscribe to Back Home in America. There's a lot more of this country's history still waiting to be walked through. Thanks for spending this time with me. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.